Today I'm talking to Fabio Lattanzi Antinori.
Fabio, people use several terms for what we're interested in: computer art, digital art, new media art, net art, and all sorts of things. Do you have any strong views either way about any of them?
I think that artists can be defined by the media that they use. You are an artist and you have your own practice, and obviously you tend to work with some specific medias. In my case, I tend to work a lot with digital things because I want to use like materials and medias that allow me to somehow provide a critique of the society that we live in. And as such, because there's a lot of digital technology and I'm quite interested in notions that are linked somehow to the way that digital technology influences society, then I kind of, as a consequence of that, I'm almost forced to use elements that come from that technology. But then at the same time, I was giving a talk like recently in Seoul at the MMCA, and I heard myself saying that everything is technology. I mean, obviously, this is like kind of probably a cliche and nothing new, but a paintbrush is technology, a pigment is technology. And if we look at the chart that describes when some types of pigments were invented, you can see that there is a plethora of pigments that get invented over the last 200 years. There is so much technology that gets involved in it. And then as such, this is something that I've seen a lot when talking about art. I would talk to painters, I would talk to more traditional artists in this way, like sculptors, painters, and tell me, no, I don't work with technology because I don't relate to it, and I don't know anything about it. When you think about it, there's so much technology involved in everything they do, from the canvas to the way that you just operate sculpture across different mediums and materials. So yeah, I don't think there is an actual. We can't talk about art in that respect.
Would you like to just summarize your own art practice and your own contributions?
Sure. Well, I tend to work with across printmaking, sculpture, installation, poetry, sound, which makes up for quite a big range of possibilities and mediums. That's also why I find it a bit difficult to talk about one specific medium as to sort of define my practice in the more synthetic way. But what I like to do is I'm interested in understanding how notions of belief and data are translated from the large corporate systems into the language of the individual. Or perhaps even better, I'm interested in the ways that in understanding why we believe in the things that we believe in. So I started working with money and finance because I'm interested in why we believe in probably the most virtual systems of all, apart from God or religions and things. And then because lots of what I do tends to kind of relate to issues of the contemporary society, then I tend to use mechanisms that somehow are appropriated from different technologies, but then are recombined in sometimes sculptures, sometimes interactive screen prints. I do a lot of mixing elements from the past with sort of cutting-edge technologies. So that's why I say let's screen prints that become interactive, but also sculptures that produce sounds and so on.
But did you come from a technical background, or were you trained as an artist and then picked up the technology side?
Oh, not at all. My initial studies were in architecture and philosophy, and I was a musician for quite a long time. And then at some point, a few things happened. I moved to London, and that's when I went to Goldsmiths. I studied computational studio arts, which combines fine art with computational technologies, and that's it. All I know about technology, I got it to learn from my tutors there, and also a lot of what I do is based on DIY technologies. So it's kind of learning by doing, and also thanks to forums and other people who share their knowledge.
When you started the computational arts degree, did you feel you were to some extent a pioneer, or this is an unusual thing to do?
No, I always felt like, probably because I come from studying philosophy and architecture and the past, and studying all these things in Italy, you're kind of trained to think that you're never a pioneer. You always can, at best, aim at doing a little bit of something more in addition to what was already done. So the usual metaphor of the little dwarf standing on the shoulder of the giants. So whatever I do, everything I do is actually taken from other people, appropriated, sometimes done in collaboration. Collaboration is a big part of what I do. And much of the technology that I'm using, like nowadays in my artworks, comes from know-how that I have achieved thanks to amazing individuals that I collaborated with who decided to share their knowledge with me. So it's more like in this type of, I believe in this kind of relationship that influences each other. And as such, no, I couldn't claim any credit for anything that I've done. What I do is mainly, like sometimes I think even what I do in terms of combining different elements, sometimes I make artworks, and these artworks go, excuse me, into an exhibition. And then somebody comes in, especially when these artworks are interactive, although people might argue that all artworks are interactive in a way, because it's always made out of something you make as an artist, but also something that the audience participating in gives back to you. And sometimes I find out about what I do or hidden meanings behind some of the artworks that I make, just because people very kindly share these thoughts and impressions they have with me. Stuff that I didn't know in the first place, so yeah.
Fabio, you mentioned the importance of collaboration in your work. Could you give me some examples?
Sure. The first one I've done, I was still studying at that time. It was with Bear Conductive. They are a collective of studio of designers, mainly former Royal College of Arts graduates. And they had created in, it was 2013, they had created a conductive paint, non-toxic conductive paint, and a touchboard, a microcontroller that works in conjunction with the paint, and which is based on an open source layout of the Arduino, which is at least back then was a more famous type of platform. And together we were commissioned by the Mac Museum in Vienna to create an installation for the museum. And so back then we collaborated together with them and with designer Alicja Pitlewska. And then because of this collaboration I was able to make an artwork for the V&A during the digital weekend curated by Irini Papadimitriou. And at that time I chose to collaborate with an opera singer, soprano opera singer Madge. And that was actually my few last months at Goldsmiths, so we were able to take advantage of the electronic studios and record Madge's beautiful voice there. And that was the data flags. I created an interactive installation. Basically it was an interactive screen print. When the audience would come near the surface of the screen print, these would sing back at them the story of Lehman Brothers, and through basically singing the last 10 years of share price of Lehman Brothers. And that was back in 2014, when probably London was feeling the lowest point of actually the biggest point of the credit crunch. Back then, that was started obviously in 2008, and Lehman Brothers played a big role in it. But this thing also evolved. I collaborated more recently with a perfume designer, Sergei Zinruk, and we used the flash crash of 2010, the data of the big flash crash, when the market in the US burned $1 trillion in a few seconds and took 16 minutes to recover. And to nowadays, nobody really knows why that happened, other than the fact that it was probably linked to the fact that there's too many machines operating on the market and too few humans controlling those machines. Somebody might say that actually there's no control at all. So we took the data and we made a perfume out of it, just by using an amazing exam which is used a lot in forensic sciences, known as gas chromatography.
Oh, yes.
And so other times I collaborated with data analysts, scientists, financial astrologers, and more recently with a Saju reader. Saju is this discipline very similar in a way to astrology, for it uses your date of birth and hour of birth, but then instead of using the position of the planets, they use elements such as fire, metal, earth, and so on. And they can tell you about your past, but also tell you about your future. And everyone uses in Korea. So we use this data in conjunction with the official government statistics data to train a little artificial intelligence system into seeing if the AI system could come up with some mysterious cryptic visions about the future of South Korea.
How do these collaborations typically come about? Do you initiate them, or do people come to you?
It's me probably initiating them. So far, actually, no. To be honest, like Bear Conductive, the very, very initial collaboration I refer to, they came to me, as in they asked me, because we had a friendly relationship and I was already using some of their products. So it kind of probably was quite natural for them to ask their network of peers, and they asked me, which I felt obviously honored to be involved in such an amazing collaboration. But then many others, because the way I work is quite research based, so I tend to read a lot of papers and things, and then I might sometimes stumble across some new concept, and the new concept might be associated with somebody who wrote about it, and then I start following the lead and going from one to another. Obviously, I refer to a growing network of people that I sometimes work with. And they sometimes come like in ways that are quite natural, sometimes are somehow demanded by some of the commissions that I receive.
I mean, you are very much a multidisciplinary artist. You encompass a really wide range of disciplines and styles. I mean, perhaps a classic pattern for collaboration between artists is that one of them is better at coding than the other.
Oh yeah.
You seem to. You've got opera singers and perfume makers and all this sort of thing. Are you, in a sense, exploring new audiences as well? When perfume makers, for example, I've never come across an artistic collaboration with a perfume maker before. And do you think that work had a wider appeal, perhaps, than traditional art might have?
Yes, I think so. And also, the reason why I wanted to work with a perfume designer, a perfumier, is that I want to make something extremely glamorous out of something so mysterious, and also something that turned out to be extremely feminine, because this perfume from the Flash Crash turned out to be Ilang Ilang, and that was something chosen by the data. I mean, when the gas chromatography expert returned the actual result of the exam, we combined Sergei Ziniruk combined the molecules, and I obviously just looked at the whole process. It turned out to be Ilang Ilang, which is extremely feminine as a fragrance. And that was sort of what I was trying to make out of it. Something funny, ridiculous, it's a bit impossible. What I think this is connected to something that art can still provide, I think. I think art sometimes doesn't necessarily need to have a specific reason of doing something, which is quite like a more and more difficult requirement for the way that contemporary society is developing. Like, if you think about like design, or if you think about engineering, they always have to know what is the final end, or what the product is going to look like, or at least you proceed by prototyping and design thinking, and then you kind of know where you're going. Art, you don't need to do that. So in a way, it's kind of an open research, at least from the way I see it, and it can lead to rather like surprising results. And obviously these allows artists to tap into different audiences as well, or even just to create correlations or connections, so that people from one group of audiences might actually be surprised that there might be a correlation, like on a chance, to look at the artwork or at the way that some mechanisms work in a society from a complete point of view. And then you might sometimes be surprised as a visitor of a show that what it looks like an actual sculpture might reveal itself to be a perfume. So this moment of taking, like, changing the narration might obviously be very interesting from the point of view of the artist in terms of analyzing what are the sort of reactions that the audience might have. And also, why not, might also open like different avenues whereby to disseminate your work.
I saw your work, Fortune Tellers, recently at York Art Gallery, and it's clear that interactivity in your work is deliberate and important for you.
Sometimes. When I was studying goldsmiths, I actually was rather against interactivity. I always see interactivity as just a defined set of rules which you as an artist, in this case, gives to an artwork, and then somehow you lead people into having to be working this forced relationship between them and the artwork itself. But then I wanted to, like, as in the case of fortune tellers, I wanted people to first have to decide whether or not to interact with an artwork, because obviously when you enter a museum you're not necessarily, well, we are trained, we are taught since we are children that we don't have to touch the artworks. So that's already something that I was finding quite interesting, for which interactivity, a type of interaction that only happens when you touch the surface, or unless you are very, very conductive, such as in the case of fortune tellers, and you can trigger it for like a few centimeters. But still, that implies for the audience to make an actual decision of breaking some boundaries and walking up to the artwork and kind of having to navigate and ask themselves, okay, what is it I'm going to touch? I'm going to touch this part, this other part. Do I have clean hands? Do I have sweaty hands? Can I touch it? Am I going to break it?
Yes.
Or something? And then will it work?
Yes.
But also because it was about, and it is about, especially the artwork there, it's about financial, it's about predicting the future across financial technology, digital technology, AI technology, and a much older one, financial astrology, which not everybody perhaps not many people know about it, but it's quite like a huge business, especially in London and the US. So when I got this data, I thought, what if the data is something so invisible? And what I do, like many artists working in this domain, is to take something that belongs to the invisible world of data and digital technology and try and make it real in a way. Just try and return some kind of real physical experience with the audience, to try and see how it looks like, how it feels like, how it smells like, as in the case of that perfume, or in this case, how it sounds like. So it's only when people touch the surface that it comes to life, which also links back probably to I'm not Catholic, neither am Christian, but I come from a city that was like the center of Catholicism. And in Italy, people say that unless you touch something, that something isn't real, which is a bit like the St. Thomas complex, that he kind of wants to touch the body of Christ, doubting Thomas. And so I think that is the reason why I wanted to, I thought that the installation would have completed itself by just having this relationship of people having to lean forward and having to touch something to see if it's real. Because the whole thing of data, in a way, could be a pile of stories told to us by everybody. Like every time I talk about my artworks, I could be making up stories continuously, because who knows what data is in those little tiny black boxes, and who knows what it belongs to. Especially in that case, I removed all connotations, especially because it was a type of data that was given to me for free, but it's type of data that normally is used for at least some of those people, like traders from Wall Street, who accepted to do it as a collaboration, also asked me not to reveal it to anyone, because obviously it was a big piece of, let's say, it's a big favor they were doing to me. So, yeah.
Do you find there are practical problems? I mean, you're sitting in front of one of your sculptures, but what the camera can't see is quite a fearsome number of wires coming out of the bottom
Yes.
of it, and presumably transporting these things, setting them up, and then just as in the case of fortune tellers, if people keep on touching it, presumably it wears away. People do touch it with dirty hands, and you get sort of, you know, all sorts of things on it. Is this a problem? I mean, do galleries find this a problem? Do you find it a problem? It's going?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, they do. They do find it as a problem. Like, but not all of them. Like recently, Data Flags, which is screen printed on paper, was acquired by the V&A collection. It's the Word and Image collection of the V&A, and obviously now they have their own scientists running a series of exams of the material as to find out what is the best way to preserve it. But I also had to. They asked me, when would you consider it to be broken? It kind of wears away, to go back to your original question, but not in the same way as it would, like, probably Data Flags, in the way that it's been screen printed, that's now kept at the V&A, probably won't stop working for many, many years to come, because obviously it's preserved in a specific way, in the ideal possible ways. I had pieces that, like in the case of Data Flags, it was damaged. It's an edition of 5, and one of them got damaged in exhibition in China because somebody opened it to see. In my opinion, they tore the paper apart to see if there was some kind of technology inside. Well, technology is actually the paint itself, which is what makes it special. In the case of fortune tellers, because it's screen printed on neoprene, which is rubber, you can clean it like very, very easily. That one was made in a way that you can actually wash it, although I haven't washed it so far, but it's been screen printed in a specific way with a specific binding system that allows it to stretch and allows it to be cleaned with water if you need to. So it's fairly resistant.
Do you find that galleries though are a bit reluctant to take on something like this? I noticed your fortune tellers was sponsored by Carla Rappaport and the Lumen Prize, wasn't it, to some extent? I mean, did they have to talk your gallery into taking it on, or were you quite happy with taking on a moving work, if you like, one that was doing something, an interactive work?
I think this is indeed like the main issue that every artist dealing with digital technologies or with kinetic sculptures, for that reason. I can think about Nanjum Pek, and I was actually in Korea recently and visiting some of his artworks at Nanjum Pek Art Center, or Daphne Oram, to make like a close example, because we were talking about goldsmiths. It's always like a big issue with the way that it's going to be preserved, the way it's going to be exhibited. Obviously in the way that I'm trying to navigate this, I'm making pieces that sometimes are quite large and big, mainly meant for institutions. Sometimes institutions I can see how interactive technology can play a good role for institutions who want to somehow tap into the public engagement. Not necessarily public engagement, but like attract audiences into wanting to experience something, in brackets, new.
Yeah.
But then the same equivalent technology can be used into making something that works in a different context, such as in the context of a gallery or in a smaller space. I don't work with the idea of making a piece that could potentially fit in somebody's collection, as in like a 2x1 with specific colors, because I noticed that it really depends on the collectors, it depends on the galleries, and depends on the institution themselves. Some of them, as soon as they see some cable, some wire protruding from the frame of an artwork, they might feel a little bit funny about it, because I don't know if it's because it looks like some kind of appliance to them, which might do,
Yes.
because it's in the nature of the artwork, but obviously it requires some more care. But the galleries I'm working with, they don't seem to have any problem with that, provided obviously that you as an artist can make an artwork that works when it's plugged in, the famous plug and pray, as they call it.
You mentioned collectors and galleries. Are you in fact currently represented by a gallery?
No, I'm not at the moment.
And is your work bought by private collectors?
Yes.
And do you know the private collectors? Do you talk to them? Do they?
Some of them. I talk to some of them who are amazing individuals, by the way. It's an actual, great pleasure to be thinking, not just necessarily to be in their collection, mainly, but also to think that some people who have, some of them are writers, journalists, lawyers, and obviously some of them instead are people more connected to the world of art. But because some of them I know actually what they write about, what they're interested in, it's a great pleasure to know that they want to engage with you as an artist from that point of view. And then sometimes I only know the names of the people that purchase, but I don't meet them.
But I mean, how does this sort of sales come about? You mentioned earlier that you've been to Rotterdam.
Yes.
How could you tell that story about how?
Of course. Yes. Well, in February I was invited by the Rider Projects, which is one of the galleries that I work with, to participate in the Rotterdam Art Fair as the presented artist. And so I had imagine, obviously, the idea was that of having a solo presentation in the booth of the art fair. And for that one I presented series of pieces, new ones, and then a few other pieces that already existed. And the piece that you see here next to me, well, you don't see it already. Okay, sorry.
I do see it, yes.
The piece that you see next to me is it was actually made not specifically for the fair, but during that time, and we decided together with Patti Lara, who was the director of the gallery, to present it in that circumstance. And the piece received lots of interest. It didn't sell during the fair. We sold something else. And now that I'm back, it was seen by Irini Papadimitriou from the V&A. And because of that, I was invited to make more pieces, because this one is actually part of a series called FAANG, F-A-A-N-G, which refer to the 5 most important companies currently quoted on the market, traded on the market. And they are Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google Alphabet. And this one you see here is Facebook. The one behind me is kind of Google, still work in progress. And then this week I'm waiting to find out how many I will actually be able to enter in the show, because the show is a group show, so depending on how much space I have, then I'll be able to submit either all of them or just our representation of them. And then obviously by receiving more visibility, in this case the show will be on for 4.5 months, actually 5 months. That will make it fairly visible, so that will also allow me to potentially reach out to a wider audience, among whom I might even find collectors who might want to buy them.
In terms of finance generally, I mean,
yeah.
How is your practice funded?
I'd like to know.
It's presumably it's a mixture of grants and purchases and all sorts of things.
Yes, it is indeed.
And by yourself at the beginning, I assume.
Yes,
yeah.
And also all along the way. It's a labor of love. Obviously I'm quite thankful to institutions such as the Arts Council, the British Council. More recently, the British Korean Society, they sponsored me for the residency I did at the Museum of National and Contemporary Art in Seoul. And so it's a mix of grants, definitely. The AN Artist Information Network, they've been amazingly supporting artists for the last many years, because I arrived in London in 2007 and they had been around, I think they've been around for 20 years now. And then obviously sometimes even Space Studios, with whom I'm actually who are my, what are they like? Well, I'm renting my studio from them. They also have specific, very good like bursary programs. And then, so it's a mix of that. It's a mix of being able to sell artworks, and it's a mix of commissions. So commissions from museums, mainly from institutions such as museums. And obviously many of these commissions tend to have, together with like obviously covering for the production and for the materials, there is also a fee for the artist. And then there is also some teaching here and there.
Could I ask you, in your view, what factors actually determine the price of an artwork?
Well, I think there's multiple factors that can play like into like generating a price for that, especially in such a volatile industry such as like that of contemporary art. But I think lots of it has to do with your experience as an artist, like your value on the market. Probably before or after that, the actual cost of making the artwork in terms of materials, in terms of value of the artwork because of the material that makes for the artwork, the conceptual value of it, but also if the artwork has been or it is, well, if the artist has artworks that are in collection with important institutions, / collectors, or anyway part of important collections worldwide, the type of exhibitions that the artist has been involved with, but then the physicality of the work itself, which might make it like more or less unique depending on the material connected to it. And then I think there is a big percentage of possibilities, because I think if anything is volatile and can be as elastic as possible, malleable as possible, plastic as possible, is definitely the art market.
Yeah. it does seem a contradiction that, you know, there's a tendency towards collaboration, and there's a tendency in artistic theory away from seeing the artist as the hero, you know, the individual who does things, drawing on the well springs of his soul, or whatever the expression is. But from a marketing point of view, the most successful people are those who build themselves into a brand, you know, Damien Hirst, Gilbert and George, that sort of person, and who, as you say, get known, get exhibited, become famous, and therefore become famous. He's still more famous. It's an interesting contradiction that I find. But have you ever found financial considerations have influenced the way that you work? You know, have you ever found that they came with strings, for example, that you got funding and you had to do something a certain way that you might not have wanted to?
Well, no. Well, yes, in a bit. As in, actually, first of all, I'd like to say, I think it was Grayson Perry who says that there's no such thing like artists being heroes. We are all businessmen.
Well,
I don't know if he was himself. I think I must have read like in the back of his book,
yes.
of the book he recently, last year, that he published. I think it was him, but don't quote me on that, which I found quite funny. Yeah. And then, that was quite like a funny thing.
It's this irreconcilable thing, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, artists want to do something because they want to do it, but on the other hand, they also want to eat regularly. And,
yes.
You know, somehow you've got to square that circle.
Yeah, it's that one, and also I recently met Raffaello Zanohemmer, who's an amazing artist, and he was having his first retrospective at the Amore Pacific Art Museum in Yongsan in Seoul. And he's an amazing, amazing person. Mainly because also he was there with like a good group of assistants, or anyway, people who work in his studio, and I don't know, there must have been at least 10 of them.
He thinks big, doesn't he? He does.
Yeah, but also because obviously his artworks are quite big, and he works. So some artists work with like artists, but also they have their own studio on the back. So Eliasson, Olafur Eliasson is one of them. Raffaello Zanohemmer is definitely one of them. And when you work in that capacity, you obviously have people working alongside with you, and you obviously become responsible for them. So in a way, I think your brain frame or your way of going about art also changes a little bit in order to accommodate some practices that sometimes appropriated from design, like which I mentioned before, or engineering, or such in this case, also probably like business planning. And also, this is like, when you consider that for many of those grants that we were talking about, like if you apply for like an Arts Council funding program or British Council or the Wellcome Trust, you need to demonstrate, obviously you need to tell them what it is that you're going to do, although you don't know what it is, and obviously they know that you don't know, and it makes sense, just like when you apply for a PhD or any other thing. But you need to let them understand to the best of your possibility what it is that you want to do and how you would administer the money and how that funding, in this case that budget, will play into making that part or that next step of your career taking place, or that next artwork taking shape. And I think there is a moment where, well, either you do it like as a single individual or you do it like as a group. You kind of have to at some point come to terms with the world of selling art. I think there is art as in making, and there is art as the art market. And they don't necessarily are the same thing, but they obviously are necessarily interconnected. Now, I don't really know fully how the art market works, but I'm rather curious to find out about. So every time I'm actually given the possibility of participating in a fair, or even just like in a few months I will actually participate in a online type of auction. And I'm always like interested in participating in these things. I find them as a unique opportunity to gather knowledge and to understand how different systems and parts of this network, of this world of the art, work like. And from my point of view, like, I am the type of artist who wants his artworks to be seen, and usually when I made something, then I like it to leave me in a way. I don't have the feeling that I need to control it. And I take not only pleasure in having people seeing it, not because it's anegotic only, because obviously there's a lot of ego stroking and caressing and all of this, but I feel that many of the works I do wouldn't necessarily be completed if they didn't have an audience. So I already have to engage with a mechanism that allows me to place my artworks in a context where the audience can actually interact with them and sometimes own them, or sometimes be in a position where they can actually look at them, or sort of have like a relation with them.
As you know, these interviews are being done for the Computer Art Society's 50th anniversary. A lot has changed over the last 50 years. Looking forward, if we can, for the next 50 years, what changes would you like to see? What would you like to see happen over the next 50 years?
Well, there's been a lot of change. Many of the medias that were sometimes not recognized as such are now being recognized. I'm thinking even about like photography, that despite not being a recent invention, found its own like recognition fairly recently. And I can see how like there will be more and more recognition for this type of media. I don't really know where the market is going to go or where our practice is going to go. I can obviously imagine that artists will make more and more use of elements that are normally used in the way that people live, elements of the everyday. So obviously a few years ago, actually some like a good 30 years ago, artists started playing around with technologies such as video cameras, or like mobiles when they get invented, and so on, because there is always this constant feeling of taking like something, reappropriating it into a different context by obviously using the language of art. I attended this talk from James Bridle yesterday at the Goethe Institute, organized by Serpentine Galleries, and he was in conversation with Ben Vickers, and it was really, really, really interesting what they were talking about when it comes to artificial intelligence, which is something that I'm feeling quite close because I'm working with artificial intelligence in some of my works. This whole idea that computers will probably, surely, replace humans in many of the jobs that we now have, I actually don't know what's going to do, because I don't see much of an interest from like governments into, some governments are doing it, but I don't see enough interest in understanding what's going to happen in 40, 50 years of time, when I think a good chunk of jobs will be erased and disappear in the name of automatic technologies and ultra-intelligent systems, namely very sophisticated AI things. And this is not science fiction, this is definitely going to happen actually before the 50 years. And I think this will also play an important role in the way that art will evolve. I always had this fantasy when I was growing up, that if I could, I come from a family where everybody always worked, where just nobody wanted to go, wanted to retire for fear of not knowing what to do. And they still are working despite they're supposed to retire, both my mom and dad. And instead I always thought, well, if I could actually not work, I would definitely spend way more time into studying, researching, writing, poetry, or like becoming interested in things that normally I didn't have time to do and make. So I wonder how this will play out in the society at large, and if this will make more people become artists in the future from this point of view.
Very interesting concept. I've got a book, I can't remember the name of the author, but a German generative artist, you know, one of the early heroic days when people could manage to get machines to make designs.
Like Manfred Moore.
Exactly. It wasn't him, but that's that sort of generation. In which the author says that machines will make art, will take over the human ability to make art. Art will no longer be special, machines will do it for us. But if anything, it seems to me the last 50 years has demonstrated anything but that. And I think what you're saying is that the next 50 years will maybe see more people becoming artists.
Yeah, although I was looking at this graph recently that sort of draws a correlation between AI, or anyway computational technologies, what computational technologies can do, as good as or better than humans, and what humans can do. And it's often depicted, I don't remember now the name of the theorist, or the mathematician who first came out with this idea of these valleys being filled with water. But it started like obviously at least like in the 30s, obviously with the first development of technologies, computational technologies being used to crack the codes during the Second World War. And sorry, I can actually delete this part because I'm probably going like a bit random. But this map of the landscape is being like filled more and more with water, and that signifies the amount of activities that can actually be just done by computers out there, better than humans. And one of the things that in this chart seem to be like the Himalayas of this landscape, the highest peaks, where art and then screen writing, like screenplay, so, and movie making. But then I can totally see how artificial intelligence could be developed into doing that. What is not really fear, but what bothers me is the fact that we don't know how artificial intelligence is actually functioning. We know that it solves problems, but we don't actually we'd actually miss the process of learning. We don't know how it gets there.
Which is one of the subjects of your work in a way.
Yes. Mine, and obviously many theorists and artists out there. So I don't actually have a pink vision of the future, but I'm also aware of the fact that probably life on this planet doesn't necessarily need to be the perfect thing. It's a constant learning for our generation and the one that will come after that. So yeah, I think I'm quite curious to see what's going to happen.
Fabio, thank you very much indeed.